I'm Sarah, the Chief Exec here at Wentworth. Delighted to see so many of you here this evening. Delighted to see the lecture series underway. It's a really big part of our annual calendar, and it's been stalled and stopped and started and stopped and started. So it's great to finally be able to have Dorian with us this evening. Dorian has been working here now for 3 years, although Donald Insall Partnership have been with us for 4 years in total now, working on the roof project and working on other projects that we're delivering at the moment, which I'm sure Dorian will be talking about in later lectures. He's an absolute whiz. It's fantastic. The rooftop project was incredibly complex and visual, and I hope some of you here tonight managed to go up and do the walk around on the roof when the scaffold was up there. But I shall say no more. Just one more housekeeping thing. If the fire alarm goes off this evening, which we're not expecting it to, but if it does, please follow our volunteers who are with us tonight. They will guide you safely downstairs and outside so that we can account for everybody. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dorian. Thank you, Dorian.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everybody. I am Dorian Proudfoot, and I am a conservation architect working at Insall Associates, as Sarah said. And we've been involved since pretty much the beginning of the Trust's ownership of the house here. I am honestly delighted to be able to share what we've been doing with you in 3 lectures. So tonight's the first one, which will cover the work we have completed on the roof. Next month, in February, I will talk about the Camellia House, which we have been working on last year, producing proposals for the cafe that's going to be there. And then in March, we'll be talking about the stables and the plans that we've been drawing up again in tandem with the Camellia House this year. So I'll be talking about phase 1 and phase 2 of the repairs to the mansion. And essentially this slideshow is a collection of site photographs, so I want to explain the work that took place with some explanation of why we've done what we've done, and in some of the more interesting areas I'll delve into a bit more detail. I've tried to put things in a sort of chronological order. Phase 1 and 2 sort of overlapped. They were 2 different projects with 2 different contractors. Phase 1 is the light green areas, so the Bedlam Wing and the chapel, and phase 2 covered the roofs over the central mansion, which we're in currently. Phase 1, the value of phase 1 was about 1 million, and phase 2 was much larger at sort of 4.7 million. And phase 2 finished about a year ago. So we'll be starting with Bedlam and Chapel as phase 1, and I kind of want to use that as an introduction to how we did the works, leading on to more detail on phase 2, which is the bigger project. So phase 1 and phase 2, the areas were chosen in joint decision between the Trust and Historic England for 2 different reasons, really. Phase 1 of Bedlam was mainly because the roof was in such terrible condition. Water was absolutely pouring in. And then the chapel in phase 2 on the mansion, the roofs weren't in as bad condition as Bedlam, but it was more to do with the significance of the rooms beneath, and the fact that if those roofs were leaking, then the Trust couldn't operate and couldn't get the business off the ground and start earning, vital money to pay for the future repairs and have events such as this. We're currently in this room here, so this roof was part of phase 2 repairs. So I'll start with Bedlam initially. This was the condition before we did any work, so the roof had completely failed. There's sort of obvious signs of holes in the roof. The chimneys flaunching had started to fail, all the stonework and the pointing, clearly at the end of its life, essentially. Big holes. One of the main issues was the lead down the parapet gutter, which was well beyond the end of its life and had completely failed. So all the water, you can imagine, is falling on the slates, coming down into the gutters, and when you get a split in the lead, instead of coming down to the rainwater goods and off the roof, it's just going straight down underneath. Issue with this was that the lead bays were much too long, which is not what we would design now. The longer the bay is, the more it kind of expands and contracts in the weather and ends up cracking and failing as it is done here. So within the rooms underneath, Bedlam had been derelict for quite a while. It was last used as accommodation in the college time, so it hadn't been used too much in the previous owners before the trust here. Water had been getting through for years and affecting the plasterwork, particularly some, the decorative cornices starting to show serious decay. There's some lovely fireplaces which are at risk. Roofs along the corridors had to be removed because they had failed, but also they contained asbestos, so we couldn't kind of get in there to survey, and the contractors couldn't do any work whilst those were in place, so those were stripped out to enable the works to take place. There were some lovely architectural features which hadn't suffered too much, such as the cantilevered stairs, which are really quite beautiful. The mansion has some really beautiful staircases, which you would have seen as you came in, quite interesting in the cantilever style. But in some areas, for example, where the lead had failed and the water had been getting in for years and years and years, it really was at the end of its life. If we hadn't have started the project when we did, these, without being propped, would have collapsed, and the project would have been a bit of a different one, really. You can see ceilings, the water coming in, going right down to the floor, all the way through the 3 floors of the building. So particularly bad was the condition of the trusses, so very large timber trusses, which, if they're allowed to be wet for a long, long time with the failed roof, you start to get the fungal decay. So you've got wet rot and dry rot, which just eats away at the timber. So Insall's, it's not just a single person, there's a team of us that come and do our surveys, along with specialists, surveyors as well. So we had timber specialists, there was the rot hound, the dog that comes and sniffs dry rot, measured surveys, a whole team to carry out surveys and kind of work out the existing condition and start to put together proposals of how we want to fix the building. I've got a few examples of drawings. We obviously produced a very large package of 20-30 drawings. Here are just a few. So technical, CAD plans and sections, elevations, some more detailed elements. So we're really explaining to the contractors exactly how we want them to rebuild the roof with much better improved details. For example, this gutter on the west side of Bedlam. A combination of drawn details, as you just saw, but also sometimes it's best to use photographs. You can explain what you want to explain more clearly with a photograph. So these drawings are the 4 chimney stacks, explaining how to replace the failed stones, the mortar repairs, the flaunching, the chimney pots, the flashings. And I've skipped a very long period of the project here. When you kind of go out to tender, you get the right contractor on board, you get the contract in place, and then you can start the works. So we skip to the works now, and I can explain exactly what happened on site. So first of all, we get access. So the contractor builds a scaffold. We start with the chimneys as the highest part. So once we've repaired the chimneys, we can then move down to the roofs, and there's dismantling, very careful dismantling of the parapets and the chimneys themselves. Material you want to store on the roof as much as possible, so the more you move it, the more there's a risk of damaging it. So here we label and dismantle the balustrades and store them on the roof for future reinstatement if they're good to be able to put back on. Chimneys we assess for the flue condition. So once we take the pots off and the stone cappings, you can get to see what's going on underneath. If needs be, there's brick repairs and flue repairs. All the stones, and this is all over the mansion. I think when you're outside looking back, you can see a few evidence of cramps, which are iron, unfortunately. Here they pour lead over the top to try and protect them from the water, so they obviously knew there was a potential issue there, but more often than not they fail. The one at the top there has failed, and you can see it's expanded. That's a big issue that we see all across the mansion. Once the chimney has been stabilised, we can reinstate the pots, this time on a lime mortar and slate packing. And then the flaunching, a nice lime mortar flaunching, so it's a bit more flexible than cement, so it can move as old buildings tend to move. And reinstate missing details. We have to be careful not to get too carried away, because this sort of project, the money from the government, it was all about, fixing the building, stopping the rot, We don't want to do too much kind of decorative work, but where the stone had completely been lost, and we had examples of what the profile was, that is a functioning piece of stone that's supporting the larger stone on top, so we reinstate that. Internally, on Bedlam particularly, this was a real big issue. The timber structure was actually in far worse condition than we had anticipated, and there was a lot of work to do there. As you can see, the condition of the large timber beams is terrible. So there's a lot of options you can do with structural repairs. We had a conservation structural engineer, so accredited in conservation, and knows what to do with an old building. This looks quite heavy-handed, but you have to kind of weigh up the different options. This ceiling, this roof void is going to be covered by a ceiling underneath, so it's not on display. Here we've got stainless steel beams to support the failed truss with a combination of timber as well. If it had been an exposed beam, we would have had a different treatment. We probably would have scarfed in new timber, cut out the rotten timber, scarf in a new piece of timber, so it's completely timber solution. But we want to kind of be as economic as we can, so here it's quite a heavy-handed approach with the steel. But the rotten timber's been cut back, and then we've got new steel taking all the weight there and sitting on the bearing on the wall. Equally to the king post, we used a combination of steel and timber to support that. And then we deal with the roof covering above. So those failed gutters that you saw early on, we replaced them with a new configuration. So we have shorter bays in timber. We replace the rainwater goods, so either refurbish the existing or we make new out of lead in a traditional style to pick up the water from the gutters. And then once the timber roof has been repaired, we start to lay on our insulation. So this is where we've taken the opportunity to improve the fabric of the building. In lots of instances, you just do a kind of like-for-like repair, so where the slates come off, you replace the slate back on where it was. But we knew that this building is going to be reused by the Trust for decades, hopefully, and we want to provide a better solution, so we add insulation to reduce the carbon and to provide more thermal performance of the roof. This is a breathable wood fibre insulation, so it works with the traditional building style. The building can still breathe and all the dampness and moisture can escape from the building. On top of that, we obviously need to put slate, and the slates from Bedlam were not good enough to reuse, especially when we're designing for 100 more years of use. And that's a bit of a different approach on this project, and we knew that with such a large roofing project we were going to need such a large amount of slate, and being the building that it is, grade 1 listed and internationally significant, we had to use the best slate going, which is Westmoreland, so British and up in Cumbria. And again, unusually for this project, the Trust procured the slate themselves rather than waiting till we had a contractor on board, then ordering the slate, then waiting for such a large quantity. To work with most economically, the Trust bought the slate themselves in advance of the contractor, which was a great move, and that enabled us, it required us to go on a visit to the quarry with our photographers. There's some good photographs. You get scale, you see the scale of the place, it's quite incredible. And amazing machines to cut the block out of the ground, take it back to the yard, the machinery, then cuts it down into smaller chunks, which are then cut by hand or split by hand into more manageable pieces, and then again split by hand into the final slates, which is amazing process to watch. And then only the best are selected for Wentworth. And you can see here one of the however many 100 crates that we received, all in different sizes sorted, so these are 20 inches down to 18.5 of best Elter water. These obviously then come to site and are fitted by the roofers here on this job, really good roofers, traditional roofers who know how to do it. So you use diminishing courses, larger slates at the bottom, going up to the smaller at the top for both the kind of aesthetic. It creates that view of the roof getting smaller at the top, but also traditionally it meant that you didn't waste anything, so even the smallest slates got used at the top. I added this slide to show that we've again improved the fabric by introducing fire breaks. So where there are internal walls up through the building, that we follow that through to the roof with fireproof material, so that if a fire breaks out in one area, it doesn't spread as easily through to the rest of the house. And there you have a completed slate roof. Obviously we renewed all the lead flashings, reusing the old chases where possible, so we're not making any more marks or damages to the building if at all possible. There was a small bit of stone repair on Bedlam, so a couple of failed balusters we made new using the old as templates. We added access so that the trust can better maintain their roof. So before it was a series of rickety ladders which weren't safe. So we add a access hatch discreetly. You can't see it from the front, but it gives the trust safer access onto the roof to clear gutters and to check the roof condition. Renew the lead on top of the pediment at the front, which looks nice and neat. And then you have a complete Bedlam roof. So it's got the crown roof, the lead on the top, all new slate on these pitches. We did use reclaimed slate on the pediment and new elsewhere. And this is the back, so it's got a brand new copper lined gutter. We added extra downpipes because the weather's changing, the world is, climate change, we're getting more rain. We want to increase the capacity to avoid any issues in the future. Following on, or at the same time as Bedlam in phase 1, was the chapel, which was slightly different because this, unlike Bedlam being a derelict building, chapel was a functioning room. You've walked past it to get here just now. The interior was in good condition relatively. Externally, there was a bit more stone decay, so you can see the cornice here is in really poor condition. And the west window again needed some stone repairs. Around there it was in pretty poor condition. And centrally, so you've got two hipped roofs on the chapel with a central valley gutter in lead, which had many of the similar issues as Bedlam. So just some nice photos of the interior from before the works, showing such a lovely room, one that the trust is part of the visitor tour, so necessary for us to fix the roof. Obviously it had failed in some parts, so there was patches of plaster ceiling missing. So as with Bedlam, we removed this slate so that we can see the issues in full view. Here there's a bit more stone repair to be done, so you cut away and carefully remove the failed stone from the cornice on the left and on the band above on the right. Dismantle the parapet, so carefully taking apart the brick parapet so that we can get down to this cornice level and to see the condition of the timbers, which of course were in terrible condition, lots of rot from years of trapped moisture and water ingress. Insect decay, once the timber gets a certain dampness, the wood boring insects then go to town on it. New stone is brought to site to replace the cornice, lovely stone cut to match the existing profile, and the parapet can then be rebuilt on top using the original fabric, so all the bricks are saved and we try and reuse everything that we can. Conservation best practice. Again, we add insulation to improve the thermal performance of the chapel. You can see timber repairs, new rafters next to the old ones where they were particularly weak or where they'd been eaten away by insects. So we put a new one next to it. You leave the old fabric there if you can for completeness. New gutters go in. This slide is quite good illustrating the ventilation. So previously there wasn't any ventilation space for air to kind of circulate to help with the dampness. So here you can see there's a clear gap of about 50 millimeters all the way down the side, which lets lets air get in underneath the gutters and into the roof space. Down the central gutter you can see on top of the new boards we put building paper, it's called, and then the lead, and you can see the air gap there, so air is able to get under the slates and through into the roof space to help with the ventilation to stop condensation, which causes dampness inside. the breathable insulation goes on, and counter battens to enable our roofing battens to go on. And on the chapel we reused the slates because they were really quite large and in relatively good condition, really thick, so we were able to reuse them and make up the missing ones with good slate from Bedlam. And particularly useful is introducing better access. So on each roof void we introduce a hatch so that they can get in to check the ceiling. This was really nice because we draw new rainwater goods, particularly on this project, lead hoppers, which we spend hours doing the drawings and then you give them to the contractor, and normally you come to site and you see what. But here I happened to be there on site whilst the lead chap was cutting out the template from our drawings to make these hoppers, which was really interesting to see. It was really nice. They did it on site. They made a little tent in site and they're able to check all the dimensions and cut it out. So we've improved the detail here. So these were the old hoppers. See the date on them. We added this weir over the top, so if there is ever an issue, instead of the water backing up and going into the roof, it will shoot over the top and out of the building. Internally, the plaster ceiling needed to be repaired where there was that patch missing. So traditional 3-coat lime plaster. This is the first coat. Cornice had started to separate away from the wall. You would never have been able to see that until we put the birdcage scaffold up inside. So that was tied back to the wall. Some decorative elements are fixed whilst we've got the access scaffold up there. Some more coats of the flat plaster ceiling. And the chandelier was a particular star of the show in the chapel, so that was refurbished by the volunteers here. It was rewired by the on-site electrician. It was cleaned up, and before we reinstated it we wanted to test that the new repaired structure was going to take the weight. So we load tested, we hung a much heavier weight or twice the weight I think for a number of weeks just to check that it was all going to be okay. And then the old chandelier was rehung after its rewire and clean. There was a bit of plaster ceiling repair on the chapel ceiling, so from above the ceiling is strengthened to stop the plaster ceiling collapsing any further. And right at the end of phase 1 we were able to sneak in some repairs to the west steps, which were important for the trust for weddings and for events, and they were in really bad condition, not safe for use really. So we were able to do some investigative work. We removed a stone to check what surprises we were going to find underneath, which was worse than we could have imagined really. It was just a pile of rubble, and not very good rubble at that either. So that was, well, the stones were carefully removed and stored next door, and then that rubble infill was removed to show us some nice archaeology. So there was an old brick arch from previous steps, we think, some pavements either side and some brick channels, which I thought were quite interesting. So throughout the projects we had archaeologists as part of the team. Before we do any work they do the recording of everything before we even remove a slate, and then if there are any surprises like this then they come and they do measured drawings, photograph everything, and at the end of the project they produce an archaeological report, which we've done for phase 1 and 2. We're then able to build a much better, stronger structure for the steps to be reinstated on, and any unusable stone was replaced with new matching stone with the same detailing, and then the steps were rebuilt. We weren't able to afford, unfortunately, to restore the iron railings, so in this instance we provided a new structure for them to be braced by, but they're still waiting for future restoration. Okay, so phase 2, which overlapped with phase 1, but is a much more significant project. As I said before, sort of 4.7 million, and involved a lot of logistics and a lot of planning. I've just got some slides of the before areas, just because there's some distinct areas, and I'll go through each sort of roof area. So this is the south wing, so above us currently. There's the central roof over the marble saloon. The north wing, so both the north and the south have copper roofs at the beginning of the project. The oak stair, so that has a roof light over the top. Long gallery, which has a stone slate roof. Another shot of the long gallery towards the east end. Showing kind of things like the chimneys are in really bad condition, just been capped off. Lots of big, very big chimneys. Everything on this phase 2 is sort of supersized, so a chimney in phase 2 is ginormous. Really, really significant issues. So before getting access onto the roof, I remember coming here when it was really raining heavily, and just the amount of water pouring into the building was incredible. And when we get onto the roof, we can understand that, again, as Bedlam, all the rain that's landing on that very large central block roof is coming down into the gutters and should be making its way to there. But because the roof is so old and is kind of sagged, and everyone walking on it, the lead has split, so buckets of water pouring in, none of it making its way to the rainwater goods. Really deep gutters, so this is all the water falling on south wing would come to this gutter and then go through a roof void in an open channel, but that channel has failed and blocked with bird nests and things, and the water just pours in. A lot of balustrades to each roof that were failed, missing balusters and broken pieces of stone. Urns in various states, there's about 26 urns I think in total. Each one was surveyed individually before the works, so using drones and cherry pickers. You can see the net, you might be able to see there's a big crack here, and that was the case in most of the urns. It was top heavy basically, and the neck was too slender, so there had been previous repairs, but well, I suppose they had worked because they hadn't fallen off, but they were very ready to fall. Lead rainwater goods, which in various states of disrepair and leaking. Internally, plaster ceilings failed due to water ingress. That's the state corridor behind the state rooms upstairs. So again, we produce a very large package of works. So for each kind of roof area, there's about 20 drawings. This is the plan of the south wing, showing the new configuration, the new materials we want to use. So we want to change the old copper, which has come to the end of its life, back to the original lead. Long gallery, so a roof plan with all the proposed scope of works, telling the contractor what to do. Some more details again of how we want to improve the rainwater goods, getting the rain off of the roofs and off the building. Chimneys, assessing every single stone and working out which ones we want to keep, which ones need to go. All the balustrades, so drawing top left is we did a drawing for each and every balustrade, showing exactly how much of each baluster to replace, whether we're replacing full balusters. And then again, we've skipped the long process of sending all that package of works to the contractors and choosing the most appropriate contractor for the job. So the first task, whilst there's obviously all the planning that's going on, we can start looking at samples of the materials. So here is the mortar. So the stonemasonry contractor provides, with our guidance, some different types of mortar, different colour, different uses of sand, different textures, different strengths of lime, and then equally samples of how they're going to do it to the building for us to comment on and tweak and make sure it's all going to look exactly how we want it with the truss input and Historic England. We were very lucky in this project to have Historic England's involvement weekly, essentially. So every weekly meeting we had Giles Proctor from Historic England to come and provide his expertise as well. We start to build the scaffold. So no mean feat, this scaffold was over £1 million of scaffolding, and really was a significant part of the project, obviously to enable us to do the works, but as you'll see in a bit, also for part of the visitor experience. With everything that goes on here, we're obviously conscious that we don't want to disrupt the business activities. So on this phase 2, we built a separate access sort of from back of house. So if there was any filming on the east front, we weren't disrupting it too much. with a bridge essentially from the service yard all the way across across the two courtyards, Piazza Court and Basin Court, to get materials. Here you can see the vast amount of scaffold to start constructing the huge scaffold. And before we put a roof on, we needed to repair all the urns, obviously, so we took them off, enable repairs to happen on the ground. So each one got a little cradle built around it, safely and securely protected so that it doesn't harm it anymore, but to enable them to crane off each urn individually before the roof went on. These were stored on the east front in a nice little pen for future work. And you start to see the visitor access being installed here. So a great idea with the Trust to provide a visitor tour so that you can share the project with people. I mean, it's great to be able to kind of do this sort of lecture to share the project, but even, you know, having the visitors during the project is fantastic for conservation in action. These are the walkways being built above the north wing, so you can see the side, that's the top of a chimney, and then you've got these walkways even higher. This is the south wing, showing the scale of it, so the scaffold going up around, ready for a roof to be put on. And they didn't make steel beams big enough, so we had to make our own extra long beam by splicing two together to bridge over the portico. And then the roof trusses built on the ground, craned on over the top, and you can see the visitor walkway along the west side. And this is a photo I took looking down from one of the upper walkways down onto a lower for one of the visitor tours in the early days before the roof had gone on. And you can see they've started to dismantle the balustrades. We built sort of perspex viewing platforms so that they could really get a good view down. And we had some guests, which was quite entertaining, but we had to respect them. At the very early stage of most projects, it's a chance for us to check everything that we've drawn from our access that we had before we had the luxury of the scaffold. Here we were able to get to this, but so Sean, the head stonemason, and I went around most areas and revisited our drawings and just checked that, you know, we agreed with his expertise as a stonemason. So here we're inspecting a chimney on the north wing, and you can see this is before he's done any removals, but you can see what poor condition it was in. It really was bad. Likewise, the cornices. There's a bit of a section later on the cornices, but really poor condition, and in this instance actually quite a health hazard, so it's excellent timing again. Like with Bedlam, we kind of got it just in time. So first job, conservation best practice is to sort of label everything so that when we do reinstate things they go back in exactly the same position. We don't want to mix up all the balusters, so they carefully get removed. The urns you can see have been taken off, apart from the one metal urn, which was unusual. We can inspect the urns, a lot of standing around and inspecting things, looking things, changing our drawings, correcting prices in the early stages. Survey the windows. We want to make use of the expertise and the access, the cost of all the scaffolding, so we surveyed all the upper huge sash windows for repairs. And the contractor can then, once the roof has gone on and the fabric sheets are put on, we can start stripping back the roof, which uncovers all sorts of surprises as usual. Some really poor condition timber where particular areas, some areas are in actually quite good condition. Where there's been an issue, the timber just rots away. South wing with all the copper removed, and start taking off the slates from the central block. So these were carefully removed and stored up at the stables currently for reuse on future projects. And we uncover some interesting things, some nice graffiti on the dormers, which again the archaeologists come and record obviously, and actually in this instance we just remove the whole piece of lead as a sort of artefact. I think you can see the different sort of signatures and dates, etc. Urns. So the urns, like I said, there's about 20 here. There's a couple which were concrete and not for repair. Sean, the mason, and I again went through every single urn, checking every stone. So they're obviously not one whole piece of stone, they're sort of layers, marking up every element. Some of them are hollow, which is quite interesting. So I've included this slide just because things like urns you kind of don't really pay too much attention to when they're on a roof, but the detail that goes into them and this process of, you know, us checking every piece to see if we, you know, if a bit falls off we need to replace it, but you then start to see the detail and the faces, and just quite extraordinary really that you would never get a chance to see that apart from this project. And all of that was done whilst the visitors were walking around us, which was quite a nice experience. You know, not often happens to us on projects. So whilst we were marking up the urns, the public were kind of walking around us and occasionally asking questions, etc. So we start getting into the masonry repairs. They produce a sample balustrade because we want to reinforce them. So there is some sneaky steel, stainless steel there to hold everything together a bit better than it was before. Chimneys again get tackled first. So in this instance we needed to do quite a lot of stone repair. So they make new pieces of stone to match the old. Every week we had inspections like this with the trustees and Historic England and ourselves, structural engineers, the main contractor, to check every detail of everything that's going on really. Stainless steel reinforcements of the chimneys. We've cut out the old iron cramps and replaced them with stainless steel to hold the chimneys together. And through Historic England's research during the project, we established that the chimneys on the central block didn't have pots originally to kind of keep the profile low. So we didn't reinstate pots. We put in a ventilated cap to keep the air flowing around the house. Now we starting to do some roofing reinstatement on the north wing. We reconfigured the gutters, so as with Bedlam we want to improve the performance of the roof. So we increased the width of the gutters so that they can take the increased rainwater. We introduced new downpipes where possible and improved the detailing. So you start with the gutter and with the sump, and then you work up. So, you know, building the new gutters to really quite wide, so it sort of attenuates the water. So you end up getting water, slowing the water down. You're not rushing the water to an outlet. The way we do this is you build a new structure first, and then on top of that, again, we've taken the opportunity to add insulation. Here, because we've got such a large roof with the balustrades, we were able to really, you know, put in as much as we could, and 150 mil, I think, of wood fibre insulation on top of that new gutter structure with a counterbat and then a batten to again get airflow over the top, so you don't get condensation on the underside of the lead. The lead's going to be cold, obviously, because it's on a day like tonight. It's going to be really cold. You don't want any warm air condensating on the bottom of it. Kept this slide in because it's a really nice view down through the roof to the top side of the plaster ceiling, which must be the state dining room, I think. But you really get to kind of, this was the great visitor experience, you know, walking around on the walkways, you get to kind of see the guts of the building. Our decks get boarded out with new softwood boarding with tiny gaps between each board so that the air can flow around. The pitched roofs get insulation on top, which then gets counterbattened and battened again, ready for new boarding. The lead starts to go on. You can see the much improved sort of detailing compared to that really early slide I showed of the very flat, not very happy gutter. Here you've got proper drip, so everything's, you know, flowing properly. The pitch roofs start to get their boarding on, ready for the final lead. Here we've again putting in fire stopping, even within the roofs, so that each smaller compartment is acting independently in the case of a fire. We try to draw everything, obviously, during the initial stages, but there's always different ways of doing things, and it's great to talk to the craftsmen. So here are the two main lead guys, absolutely fantastic craftsmen, and this chap's quite outspoken, he always thinks he knows better, so we kind of reassess details occasionally and improve it where possible to try and limit the joints. We want to try and avoid hot works, which is lead welding, so that's what we're always trying to remove, that risk of a fire during the construction period. Final lead starting to go on. Balustrading being restored. Here we've got completely new balusters here. There we've saved as much fabric as possible and only replaced the failed bits on top. And then we nearly finished the north wing. Had to come back to finish chimney. We didn't manage to do it before the lead roof went on. Internally in the roof void, again we found some interesting graffiti. There is quite a lot of steel above the marble saloon in the roof there from previous repairs. Had to check that's all in good condition. I was particularly interested in the construction of the plaster ceilings in the marble saloon and in the wings as well, but these downstands here above, it's all timber and there's no nails or brackets, it's all traditional jointing. Quite incredible really, and detailed. So this was completely cleared out by conservators, very carefully vacuumed to remove all the debris so that we can assess the condition. Some areas did need repairs, so this is a very delicate way of repairing a plaster ceiling without adding tiny amount of weight with the stainless steel wires, just to kind of give the plaster an extra help from above. Underneath we were doing pinning where needed and crack filling just to consolidate the marble saloon ceiling. We still need to come back and do a final restoration. All we've managed to do with the budget is stabilise it for now to stop it getting worse. Iron cramps rather on the portico. You can just see the sheer force. So iron, when it rusts, it expands. It can expand up to 12 times, and the force of that just completely blows stone apart. So we replaced them with stainless steel. On the south wing, we wanted to improve the roof as much as possible, and here was quite a big surprise where when we stripped off the roof, we found that there was a lower roof underneath. So we changed our plan to, after some exploration, to check everything was okay. We did find a flue which came across from the state corridor, so there is a fireplace on the outside wall of the state corridor which comes up and then across to a chimney here, so we had to work around that. That was no problem. You can see we put insulation in between the deck here, so trying to keep everything as low as possible so that we don't come up on the balustrade and spoil the look from the ground. Yeah, that's very important, not to to show any changes if possible. And then much like the north wing, just covering changing the picture slightly, adding insulation, new timber, structure and deck. And replacing the balustrades. Some nice new carved balusters where they'd failed. And then final deck on top before the lead, and then really nice lead work with very large ventilation along the ridge, which was something missing before. Now the central block is Westmoreland slate, so we stripped that back, and this again was a really good example of being able to see through into the building, and just the scale of it was impressive. And I was again particularly interested with the chandelier mechanisms, which I think there isn't a chandelier in Marble Saloon, but I think these proved that there was once. And the visitors would never have been able to see that before. Again, the gutters go in, much widened if possible, insulation on top, battens and counter battens to create that ventilation, and then halfway through putting the battens on for the final slate on the portico, and then diminishing courses again. Just a vast amount of slate, very impressive. Burlington Slate came and visited halfway through to check we were using their super special slate in the best way. These are the two main roofers, Dave and Martin. father and son who did most of the central block, the lead and the slate themselves. They were nice characters. And just nearly finishing the hip of the central block. You can see the lead tabs already installed, ready for the hips. That's Martin just finishing off. They said they'd never want to come back to do a roof like this, but then they did return to do the North Pavilion, so they can't keep away. Good improvement, I think, which was Giles's idea, was to add lead panels around the piers. So obviously we want and we encourage, it's part of our maintenance plan, that the trust maintain these roofs and have to scramble over them monthly if possible. But if you're trying to shimmy around the pier, you'll stand on the slates and you'll crack them. So we've took the slates away, put our lead panel on so that we don't cause damage, and which is exactly why the roof had failed in the first place. People walking on it, which is necessary to maintain it, but you know, your foot goes through the lead and then it escalates. Final things on the central block. So these piers here cantilevering, that was quite a headache of a detail. Don't think those have been repaired yet. Here we did a sort of lead apron around the bottom so that we didn't want to narrow the gutter basically and create a sort of bottleneck in the water. Balusters, again, you know, supersized on phase 2, so these are probably about that big, and you know, even individually they're quite a big job, not when you look at the whole scheme of things, but here being in progress, being repaired up there. And then some nice shots of, we try and obviously keep as much of the original fabric as possible, only replacing what's necessary. Cornices were a big part of the project. They weren't supposed to be, but we took the opportunity to do the best job possible. Involved a lot of survey work, so you know, I inspect, I check, and with a chalk mark up what unfortunately we have to replace. Really bad on this is on the north wing. So from the ground it didn't look too bad, but once you get up close it had actually been plastered over in a very hard cement mix. And they've done quite a nice job, but it's the wrong material. The cement is too hard, it's impermeable to water, so the soft sandstone behind just rots away, turns to sand. So we cut out the failed stone, propping where necessary. These are the removed elements. Some of them taken away for matching with the new ones, which are here, brought to site, and very beautiful craftsmanship. Some of them just individual, where it was just the console bracket that needed to be replaced. We could just cut out the console bracket and put a new one on. Where a whole unit needed to be replaced, you know, you do the whole piece of stone for structural strength. You can see the different colour stone here. So the large blocks that had failed, we wanted to reuse that stone. It's Ketton stone, which is incredibly expensive and rare. They save all the good Ketton for Cambridge Uni. I think they've kind of got tabs on everything. So we recycled our Ketton by cutting the good stuff out and then re-carving it to match the details. Here's one of the recycled pieces. Larger blocks we had to make out of Ancaster hard, which is the closest match chemically to Ketton. That goes into the wall. Repeat many times for the vast elevation of the south wing and the north wing. And then you end up with lovely carved new cornices. And the two different stones. So this is the sandstone, which actually goes in quite grey, but it gradually, there's iron, very fine iron in it, and that sort of oxidizes and it goes to that nice buff colour. This is the limestone, which comes the nice colour already. The long gallery was slightly different, similar sort of thing. Dry rot, really bad dry rot, which sounds terrifying, but we work with quite a lot of timber specialists who in quite a few instances just you don't sort of treat the dry rot, you just fix the issue. Once the timber's dried out and the roof is working again, the dry rot stops. You're never going to lose it. You know, dry rot spores are everywhere, but you know, these are quite scary photographs for conservation architects. Again, we insulate over the top and ventilate. New lead gutters going in, And then this is different because it was stone slates rather than Westmoreland slate. So we reuse about 80%, but we have to find new for the ones that are broken or break as you take them off. And then those go on, and then you have a completed long gallery roof. There's about 3 roof lights on the project. Again, very large, probably the same size as from here to the wall. We carefully dismantle them. This is over the oak stair. Carefully dismantle, take off the glass, take off the metal glazing bar structure as one if possible. So they make a ring and then kind of fix it all together to try and brace it all. The metal gets cleaned up and then redecorated, so that is the original metal but it looks new. And then if the oak ring beam had failed, we replaced it. If we could save it, we did. Here on site, trying to figure out the fine detail of how to stop the water, how to treat the water around it to make sure it's dripping off and going away. And then the glass goes back on. It's just simply clipped with copper clips, but we improved the detail with the lead coming up and under and then a lip so that any condensation gets collected and discharged off the roof rather than soaking into that oak ring beam and dropping away. Lead rainwater goods, completely refurbished for the whole of the central block. Some new ones made, some old ones before they were refurbished. We were trying to work out the detail. We didn't put that one back on, that was to be fixed. The hoppers, which are fantastic, huge hoppers. We did very small improvement just to form a bit of a dish at the top so that the water would spew out the front rather than backing up into and against the building. Quite a few new downpipes were made, again on site in the workshop, which was really interesting to see how they did it. And reinstated. This is a refurbished downpipe, very large. And then another one, so huge, to deal with all the water coming off the building. The balcony in the marble saloon, we noticed because there's so much water ingress, it was really rotten underneath. We were a bit worried about that. So we investigate, take off the floorboards and check the timbers that were cantilevered into the wall and load test again like we did with the chandelier in the chapel. In order to check it was safe for the trust and visitors to walk on, we tested it and it proved to be okay. Timber sash windows came back from the workshop, so this is the original, but it's been restored and we had to choose a new paint, which was a big group effort and needed to, it sounds like a small job, but it's so important to kind of get the colour of the windows right. Like with mortar really, they kind of want to be subservient-ish. Found some more graffiti, this time from 1955. So going into a little bit more detail about particularly fun element was one of the statues. We obviously assessed all of the statues on the central block as part of the project. This one was clearly in particularly bad condition. It had failed, it was too top heavy, too front heavy. So we dismantled it and found that there was a large piece of iron corroding in the centre and causing that issue. We cut that out and then start pinning it back together. So you can see a piece of stainless steel here which has gone through 2 pieces of stone. You cut an extra big hole and then you plug stone in behind it so that from the surface you can't see obviously the secret fixings. To improve it, we produced a stainless steel plate which could be fixed to the top and the bottom to hold it all together, which Sean looks particularly happy about, and was recessed into the bottom half, which then enabled us to replicate or to renew the spine, which was copper originally. We've done it in stainless steel and then put stone cladding in front of it again to disguise it. And then the missing part of the skirt was then built up in mortar, layer upon layer upon layer, over many weeks, and then the weathering was accelerated so that it matches. So that's a mixture of sort of yogurt and charcoal and things just to get that colour, just to help nature on its way. And then we start to dismantle the scaffold, which again is quite impressive, using some very large cranes, and enables our urns to be finished and reinstated. And during lockdown, so all, halfway through this, we obviously encountered coronavirus, and there was a 5-week off-site period, which was best of all my projects, which was good. The contractor was very accommodating, but some of the masons were able to take the urn home and produce the 2 new urns. We had concrete urns on the south wing, which were to be replaced in new sandstone to match the existing. So they were beautifully manufactured during lockdown. On other urns where elements were replaced, we were able to keep the good pieces of stone and just replace the failed stone. Put a big dowel this time right the way through. So it didn't have any fixing like this before, but that goes all the way through to do the job of that failed slender neck. Here are the new urns on the south wing and the restored urns replaced. We did some cleaning over the portico. The portico floor, we were able to, well, first of all we investigated to check what was going on. It was leaking over the reception quite badly. Lifted all the stone, repaired the timber deck, checked it was fine, which it was from below. Really huge pieces of timber above the reception as you come in the pillared hall. Do some timber repairs where necessary. Here you can see the in progress. Put a new deck down, new master cashfold, traditional way of waterproofing, and then the stone goes back on top. Above that, we were very fortunate to be able to repair the plaster ceiling. So this hadn't been seen, well, I hadn't seen it, because it got covered by a scaffold crash deck because it was in such bad condition, pieces were falling off. We were able to remove that to survey it, do a report, proposals and costs for conserving the plaster ceiling, which took place. I think there's about 30 elements or maybe 60, quite a lot of these decorative elements needed to be replaced. There were some big holes that needed to be repaired, restored. It was completely cleaned, by specialist conservators and redecorated, and now is looking beautiful. So some final shots of the repaired roofs, so chimneys, these lovely urns, and you can see the lead detailing. Some good shots of the balustrading and these ventilating ridges and the fantastic lead work. The north wing and the stone repairs. And then a reminder of the scale of the central block roof. It's had some good coverage recently. So in December, this project, phase 2, was in the Architects Journal, which is the most read architects press, on the front cover of the specification and a big element side. During COP26, we did a case study on it to explain how we've improved thermal performance, like I've said, and increased the capacity of the gutters with climate change. There's the TV programme. So I haven't covered phase 2E, which is the North Pavilion, in this lecture. We might do one on it later. But there is the programme Nick Knowles Heritage Rescue, which is really good coverage of that project. This is day 1 of filming. The stars of the show were really the weather vane and the clock faces. And that's that. So, any questions? And I'd be happy to go back and go into more detail in some elements. Thank you.
Well done, Dorian.
Sorry.
Do you want to, any questions? Go on.
You mentioned about betterment of design.
Yeah.
So who is the approving authority that rubber stamps your alteration to the original design?
So, Historic England, heavily involved. Grade 1 listed building, if you're going to change anything, you need listed building consent. You apply for listed building consent to the local authority. If it's grade 1 or grade 2 star listed, they have to go to Historic England for approval. We were very fortunate to have Giles working with us throughout the project, so he helped with these changes in the first place. So it wasn't a surprise to them. We were working sort of in partnership with them. So yeah, they approved the change to the historic building, and then local building control would then, our insulation, our construction details are checked by the local authority building control, and you get building control approval to do the proposed changes based on the drawings. And during the works, the building control officer visits every 2 months, mainly managed by the main contractor, who just shows them everything they're doing, and they check that we're doing it all in line with current standards. And
Did you have any no's?
do we have any no's? No, it was all
No.
all well managed.
It's all about consultation, like Dorian was saying beforehand. We did everything. In fact, this project in particular, I think you'll agree with Dorian, was a fantastic example of kind of a team effort. Everybody coming together, all the key people who needed to make decisions, getting involved really early on, and batting ideas around between us all, wasn't it?
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
by the time we got to the conclusion of what we wanted to do, there was really general consensus from the trust, from Historic England, from the architects, from the contractors. So.
Yeah. Every week we did a site walk around with as many people as could attend, and every problem was solved as a team. That's why I included the lady and the baby, the statue. That was a combination of the stonemason, the structural engineer, us architects, the main contractor, Historic England, everyone, literally problem solving on the spot. It was really good collaborative work.
I should say, the lady with the baby, I think part of the problem was it's not a baby, it's the lady with the teenager. It's an enormous, great big thing, isn't it? It's no wonder she kept falling over.
Yeah.
Any more questions? Yes.
You mentioned that there was quite a lot of graffiti. Were the modern day workers, were they allowed to leave their version of graffiti?
Well, so on some projects we do a plaque, especially on lead roofs. On top of the new lead roof, you would do an engraved plaque, and that's our kind of approved way of leaving our mark. We didn't give them any permission, but I would bet you that there's a lot of. So I didn't have a photo, but when we did the portico floor, that's where we found that piece of timber which had Jack and Jack and Jack, I think, the joiners, and our joiner was called Jack as well. So I think that made the local press. But yeah, that was a good piece of. But I'm sure a lot of people have left their mark carefully.
We should say as well, the people who had the slates, who purchased, made a donation and had an engraving put on the slate, they went in over the portico, didn't they? So they are on the underside of the slates that got laid in over the portico. Yes.
Is the place watertight now?
Yes.
Yes. Those
Short
parts of
answer.
it are, not all of the house, but yeah.
Yeah.
At the back.
I'm interested in the discipline of an architectural practice that we've gone through. So do you train to be an architect and then do conservation architecture training, or do you start off in that field and specialise early on? I'm just interested in the process.
So personally, I've always been into conservation. As an architect, you do 3 years undergraduate, and then you go into practice for a year. It's called your Part 1. And it's up to you which practice you go to. Personally, I went to conservation practice and started from day one in the conservation world. And then you go back to university for 2 years to do your masters. Then you go back into industry to do your final professional exams, which can take 1 year plus. And again, I went to conservation practice. So I think you don't have to. I'm accredited in conservation, which again is another qualification. You have to prove that you are a safe pair of hands with a historic building. but you can change. You can start working on modern buildings and then come to a conservation practice, and gradually learn. You don't have to go from day one into conservation. But there are there's masters courses in conservation. There's all the SPAB training that you can do. There's week-long courses through to 2-year masters.
Hi.
You first.
So my childhood home is also listed, so
Mhm.
I understand what it's like to have these nasty surprises.
Yeah.
So what was, over phase 1 and 2, what was the main thing that you weren't expecting that you found that halted work or annoyed you, or what was the biggest, the biggest annoying surprise?
Well, I think the biggest financial and programme surprise was the structural timbers in Bedlam in phase 1. I think that had the biggest impact on the project. Phase 2, we were so lucky to have the temporary roof, and the contractor was particularly good in their approach. So we installed the temporary roof, and then they stripped everything so that they could work on multiple areas at once. So if we did have a surprise on the north wing, they could just move on to the south wing until we sorted that out. Fortunately, there weren't really any big surprises in phase 2. But yeah, phase 1, I think the structural, those big repairs we had to do to the trusses was the biggest surprise, definitely.
I think the cornicing as well. So the cornicing was an extra £360,000 that we needed to raise. Once we got up there and we really examined it, that we hadn't really budgeted for, but we did raise it and we did repair it, which was great.
Yeah. Yes, I think at the back here.
Sorry.
Thank you for coming and explaining this so well. My question is the project over budget?
No.
No.
It's slightly under budget actually.
Yeah,
That's excellent.
so we were able to add on with extra kind of COVID recovery funding a little bit. We were the last 2 bits, the portico floor and the portico ceiling, were extras that we were able to afford because we were under budget.
Yeah, well done, thank you.
Yes.
Could you just explain where the funding came from, please? I understand it's from various sources, but some...
So the funding for phase 1 and phase 2, so the work that Dorian's been talking about tonight, came from the grant from the Treasury. So Philip Hammond in 2016, in the autumn statement of 2016, announced funding for Wentworth, and that was prior to the purchase of Wentworth, but it was absolutely necessary because the trustees couldn't really have taken on the purchase of Wentworth without that funding, because the state of the building was deteriorating so rapidly. And actually, although the trustees had raised the money to buy Wentworth, they didn't have any money at all to do any repair. And it's a huge risk taking something like this on. So obviously, although it's a Grade 1 listed building, and you may see it as an asset, it's actually a huge liability, a legal liability for the trustees, because they're legally responsible to maintain and conserve the building. So they really needed that injection of money. They needed to know that if they were going to buy it, that there would be some money to do the most urgent repairs. Now obviously 7.6 million, which the Chancellor announced, is just a drop in the ocean for the full repair of the site, but it was enough to allow the sale to go ahead, the purchase to go ahead. So the money for this came from the Treasury. The extras, the cornicing, came from other funders, because obviously we hadn't budgeted for that, so we went out and applied for other funders, so various trusts, donations as well. You know, people often say, does my £5 really make a difference? It makes a huge difference, because there's always extras that we can fit in. So it comes from a mixture really, public fundraising, government funding, and also from private trusts. This lady at the front, sorry, you've been waiting.
That's all right. Whilst the scaffolding was up, would it have been prudent but perhaps too expensive to clean the building at the same time? Or was that not deemed
It was
to be
never
necessary?
it was never on the cards to clean it, really.
No.
I think once cleaning is...
Cosmetic.
Yeah, it's a can of worms, really, because if you clean a certain part, it's going to stand out. You need to clean everything. If you clean a historic building, you're kind of accelerate, unless you do it really carefully with proper conservation clean, you're potentially taking off, you know, a tiny bit of that stone which has already been stood for 200 and 300 years. So no, cleaning wasn't really on the cards, to be honest.
I think as well, I mean, certainly I've said it won't get cleaned well under my watch. There's many other things further up the list that are more critical.
It's cosmetic.
It's cosmetic, and also it's a really important part of the story. The house is black because of coal, and coal mining is in its DNA, you know. So I think for now, certainly on my watch, it won't be clean.
Can I just ask about the some of the metal urns?
Yeah.
Why they were there in the first place? They really stand out.
Yeah, I don't know why they're there. I assume maybe the stone one had failed and they didn't want to go to the expense, whether it was in the college ownership or the private ownership since. They didn't want to spend 20 grand on a new stone urn. They had been painted in that green colour. They're not even copper, they're tin. So they painted them green to look like copper that has been, you know, weathered. I think, so the one on this project wasn't a flue. But I think the one on the North Pavilion was a flue, so it was part of a chimney. But I don't know, I honestly don't know the real answer.
They're pretty expensive things to replace, so hence there was 2 concrete ones as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Any more questions from anybody for Dorian?
When you started getting into the nuts and bolts of the project, what was your opinion of the standard of workmanship that had been done during the original construction? Was it great? Was it indifferent?
The materials that were still there from the original construction were, as you'd expect with the place of this significance and wealth, really good. You know, they did use the best slate, the Westmoreland slate, and the lead and stone. It's more the subsequent repairs that were substandard. And sometimes which is, I can understand, you know, they probably didn't have the knowledge like we do. You know, they used cement. They didn't use it on purpose, you know, to do harm. They thought this magical material, which, you know, it's not like lime. It goes off instantly and whatever. That's what caused the most damage. No, that's like the timber roof structures. You know, the size of the beams and the jointing and the marble. You know, it's absolutely fantastic. So I would say the original material is top quality, and then it's the subsequent.
I suppose the budget's changed over the years, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry if it was a bit of a marathon, but it was such a fantastic project. There was so much to it, and I really appreciate being able to share it with people.
Yes, can I say, Dorian, thank you for reliving the last 3 years of our lives in 1 hour. It just brought some of the horrors back to me. You wouldn't believe how many different shades of white you can get when you're trying to find the right paint colour for the windows, or how shocked we were to find yet another roof under the existing roof. But can I, on behalf of the Trust, thank Dorian tonight and for a fantastic lecture. Thank you. University College Rotherham, who are with us tonight, who are filming this so that people can watch it digitally, those who aren't able to join us in the room tonight. So thank you to you guys, students and tutor, for being here. Thank you to our amazing volunteers who are just the lifeblood of this organisation. And finally, thank you to you for coming out tonight. Do come to future lectures. This is just the first of many that we've got running, so I hope to see you all again very soon at future ones. In the meantime, please keep safe. And thank you for coming.